Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest today. He is a professor of economics at the University of Angers in France. He is the author of several books, including The Ethics of Money Production, How Inflation Destroys Civilization, Deflation and Liberty, and the autobiography of Ludwig von Mises, The Last Night of Liberalism. And his latest book is Abundance, Generosity, and the State, an inquiry into economic principles. Professor Guido Hülsmann, thank you for coming on the podcast, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, if I can try an attempt at summarizing some of your research, correct me if I'm wrong, and would this be accurate to say that it is monetary policy of legal privileges of central banks and monetary authorities that produce paper money, which creates the moral hazard and the development of the encouragement of debt, as well as inflation, moral corruption, spiritual distortions, and societal destruction?
Yeah, that's an important part of it.
Okay. I just finished your book last night, The Ethics of Money Production. And it's a really great work. I would just like to ask you to discuss it. How did this book come about?
Well, I had been approached in about 2004 or something like this by the Austrian Institute, which is an institute that disseminates Christian or Catholic social teaching among economists and free market economics among theologians. It's called after Lord Acton, who was a late 19th century German-British historian who became famous for his historical analysis of European liberalism and European development, the role of the Catholic Church and of Christianity more generally for European liberty. And so the Austrian Institute asked me to write a short book on the morals of money. Okay, and the various titles were being discussed at the time, so then I eventually opted for a title that Lou Rockwell had suggested to me. He said, well, you should call it The Ethics of Money Production. And I initially, my favorite title was Just Money, because there's this wordplay. It's only money, but it's just money. It's also just money. Well, anyway, so this was about 2004-05. So I was writing this book, and then it became larger than the Austrian Institute wished. So we couldn't come to terms. They wanted to cut it down to about a third of what it eventually was. And I said, no way, I want to have the book published as is. And then the Mises Institute published it in 2008. That's the background story.
Okay. Well, let me ask you too. I haven't finished reading your latest book, Abundance, Generosity, and the State. Actually, I was reading it and then I lost it. So I got a second copy. And then I found the original copy. I think it fell under my bed or couch. And so I have that to read still. But how about that book?
Well, this book has also a prehistory. Well, Pope Benedict had published an encyclical letter with the title Charity in Truth, Caritas in Veritate, in 2009, in which he took issue with the disappearing importance of gratuitous goods in the economy, gifts, non-commercial orientation, leisure, all these things. And he said, well, this is bizarre because, after all, the most important goods of humanity, they're all gratuitous. God's love is gratuitous. We don't pay for sunshine. We don't pay for oxygen. And lots of even material things that are absolute of fundamental importance, and they come for free. So wouldn't we think that also in the economy there should be gratuitousness should play a bigger role? And I said, well, the tendency seems to be the inverse. People want to get paid for everything. So what are the causes of this phenomenon, and what can be done about this? So it's more of a question mark. And then I didn't have time to deal with this at first, and I asked a doctoral student to work on this. So she had a first shot. And then after she was finished, the Mises Institute was just a pure coincidence, right? But the Mises Institute invited me to give a lecture on religion and economics. So I chose that topic, so the economics of gratuitousness. And in my lecture, then I more strongly emphasized those things that she hadn't fully treated in a dissertation. So this was then the start of the work on the book. So I had this very big manuscript. I mean, for an article, it was big. It was something like 40 pages. It was too big for an article. So I said, okay, so what do you do with it? Now, okay, you could write a short book. For a book, it was a little too small. It needed to be double the thing. It was about 10,000 words, or I don't know what, or 20,000, and it would have been nice to have about double. So then I started working on this, and then the project got out of hand. Now the end result was this rather big book of 150,000 words or something like this, but with more satisfactory treatment of gratuitous goods, their nature, their causes, and their consequences.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you. I'm very influenced by your work in writing about the spiritual and cultural effects of money production. And what are you currently looking into now, or developing, or have been thinking about in relation to this idea?
Well, currently, no, I'm not going more detail. There's always some new thoughts on this, but I don't really have a book in the making, or even an article. I'm working on other things right now, but which are, of course, related in one way or another. So I'm dealing with theory of finance and macroeconomics. I still have a book that's supposed to be translated. It was a German language book, which appeared in 2013. So I never could get myself to publish the translation, but maybe I will. I'm hesitating. I'm in a phase of hesitation right now.
Okay. These are on my mind, and I do want to ask you a couple questions regarding your work, the ethics of money production. Where did you first come across Nicholas Orisme?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't remember distinctly where I picked this up, but it must have been some 19th century writer dealing with monetary issues, probably a footnote or something like this. And then once I got a hold of this, then I looked at the literature more systematically. Then, of course, if you know what you're looking for, you find more. And so he had been quite well known in the 19th century, and then forgotten, or only interspersingly popped up. I think Hayek knew him in the 1930s, and various others, but then those names disappear, they come, they disappear. I think what is really important in order to understand the significance of Orisme's work is that he's dealing with inflation. He's dealing with artificial increases of the money stock. And this is not readily apparent if you read the original Latin title and then also the translated title, because they stick to the original title. The original title was something like Treatise on the Alteration of Money, about changing money. Okay, so what is money? Well, money at the time is a coin. So if you change a coin, okay, why should you change the coin? I mean, maybe it's no longer appropriate for commerce. It's too small or too big. I mean, but why would you change the coin? I mean, if this is no longer appropriate, well, then you use other coins. They are smaller, other coins are bigger. So why would you meddle with the coin, right? And of course, he develops all the essential arguments of a moral nature and also of an economic nature and of a political nature why governments shouldn't do this. have no right, nothing good can come out of it. So he understood fully that no good economic consequences would come out of this. Quite the opposite. It would paralyze trade and the division of labor, and so therefore he opposed it. But it's really a treatise on inflation, treatise on government meddling with money, or you could say a treatise on expansionary monetary policy. Right? Must be more in the jargon of today's macroeconomics.
Mm-hmm. And this is a question I have for you. In chapter 16, your chapter on international banking systems from 1871 to 1971, you discuss in a paragraph the glory of the classical gold standard. And I mean, I don't need to read to you your own work, but maybe for the audience, so they have some more context, if you don't mind me reading. You write, however, as we have seen, even in the respect of the classical gold standard was rather imperfect. It did, after all, not result from the free choice of free citizens, but from the discretion of national governments. It gave the world a common monetary standard, gold, but this standard sprang from the coercive elimination of all alternative monies. Its ultimate effect was not to give the citizens of the world an efficient monetary system, but to deliver a pretext for national governments to finally bring the monetary systems of their countries under their control. The classical gold standard was therefore hardly a bulwark of liberty. It was a crucial breakthrough for the societal scourge of our age, government omnipotence. So let me ask you, because I was confused, and because I have you here for clarification, are you critiquing the gold standard?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So the gold standard, of course, was an impediment for excessively expansionary monetary policy, right? So that's true. Having the gold standard was much better than having a fiat money system. That's for sure. But it was a step away from the more robust natural monetary order that we had in the European Middle Ages and that prevailed in some areas, at least, until the 19th century, which was based on people owning the precious metal coins that they would exchange. And that was most notably the case with silver coins. Gold coins were exchanged too, but because of their purchasing power, they have incomparably higher purchasing power. So they were typically used by merchants, large bulk sums and so on. So it was not the money of the everyday money, right? It was not in the hands of all citizens. That was only the case with silver and also some copper coins and so on. So gold has this one big advantage from the point of view of centralized government, that you can have a concentration of large purchasing power with not much volume, physical volume, and not much weight. So it's much easier to manage a gold standard politically than to manage a silver standard. Right? And plus, if you force everybody to use gold, well, then actually, because gold is unsuitable for daily exchanges, you do not do your groceries with a gold coin. So therefore, you need to have some substitutes that you use at the place, which are just placeholders for gold. So what would these be? Well, you know the answer. So it would be either token coins or, and that was more prevalent at the end of the 19th century, banknotes and accounting money issued by banks. So in fact, the introduction of a gold standard is tantamount to a hidden subsidy for commercial banking, and in particular, fractional reserve banking. So what you win on the one hand, you lose, and more than amply lose, on the other hand.
Okay, so then my question would be, what is your ideal form of money?
I can tell you what my ideal process is. So I like competition. I think I'm not sure whether. Maybe I have a personal affection for precious metal coins, but I mean, this is I wouldn't prescribe people how they should exchange, which kind of media of exchange they would use. I mean, if they want to use Bitcoins or Ethereum or I don't know what, they should certainly be free to do this. And what I expect, if you have a free market process, then as Friedrich Hayek has explained many decades ago, he said, well, competition is a discovery process. It will lead us to the kind of institutional arrangement that is most suitable for most people, most suitable for all to cooperate. That's really what you want. What you don't want is a monetary system that is being hijacked and controlled by just one party. Typically, it's the government. Right? So this is then this degenerates because it's no longer a network that serves all to participate and everybody is free to join or not. Then it's geared to the advantage of this one party, and then eventually participation becomes mandatory. And it's even a question of sheer survival, not only politically, but also economically. So then you become completely dependent on something that serves really the interests only of one party, which is not really interesting.
Yeah. I do like how you conclude the book with discussing that the change must be legal rather than the tools of the system. So I'm not on Twitter too much, and I've been hearing you've been having some debates with perhaps Professor Philip Baggis and Jesus Huerta de Soto. I want to ask you what's going on there. What are you guys debating about?
Oh, we had an exchange of blog entries in the last fall, running from late October to late November. And this pertained to the consequences that would have followed from the closing of the Central Bank of Argentina. When Xavier Milei was a candidate to the presidency in 2023, he had promised that when acceding to power, he would close the central bank, right? So he was always wielding his chainsaw, cutting down this like a old tree, right? Cutting out this ministry and this ministry and this, all gone out, right? And he said, we do the same thing with the central bank. Don't need these guys, all these fat cats, and so on. So then he comes to power, and the closer he gets to the election, the more it becomes clear that he probably he might have a real chance to be elected. Then he tones down that message, right? So about closing, it doesn't talk about this. He says, yeah, maybe we need to be proceed in a very circumspect manner, and so on. And then once he was elected, he didn't close down the central bank. Okay. Now, it's pretty obvious why he didn't do it, because I mean, closing down the central bank is creates a terrible economic crisis, because the entire economy is dependent on the central bank in the short run, right? Of course, then in the long run, not. You take it out, then people will find some substitute and develop this, and a more robust system will result from it. But in the immediate run, it's just a terrible economic crisis. The whole banking system collapses, financial system collapses, many insurance companies, investment funds, it's just a mess. It's a mess, and also for the labor market, many people losing their jobs because everything needs to be rebooted, right? And because the economy is not a system like your computer, your desktop computer, which has the one system that reboots exactly the same thing that produces. Market economy is not that way, right? In a way, there needs to be new channels of trade that develop. Everything needs to grow. But it can be very fast, but it takes a couple of months. And depending on the institutional impediments, might be 2-3 years. So it's really a very, very tough thing. Now, if people understood really how terrible central banks are, they might endorse such a reform, because it might still be better than continuing with the central bank. Now, I believe Javier Milei didn't have enough time really to present the situation as it was. It was more like a publicity stunt. Yes, we'll cut down the central bank as well. So nobody was really prepared for that kind of move. Plus, it would have completely exploded his fragile political government, right? Because he and his sister, they were libertarians, maybe one or two other guys, but you don't run a government that way. I mean, you need to have the support of lots of other people. So it was really not surprising, if you know a bit about politics, I mean, real world politics, that he didn't close down the central bank. But then he appears on TV or radio, I don't remember, and he explains, yeah, we couldn't close down the central bank because it would have created a hyperinflation. Now, that was complete outlandish. I mean, this is complete nonsense. The exact opposite would have happened, not a hyperinflation. And I said, okay, this guy he just doesn't know Austrian economics. And I hadn't really looked in detail at his CV and what he did before. I didn't know much of it. I actually learned most of what I know about him through Philip Bargus's book on the era of Millet. So then it's obvious that the guy really is deeply steeped in neoclassical economics. He worked as an economic journalist. He worked as a business consultant. So he has a very practical approach to economics. And as far as theoretical economics is concerned, the only thing that he really knows is neoclassical economics. And from Austrian economics, he had a quick reading, but he understood the meaning. So this is really the case for completely free markets, and there's no justification for having regulations, for having excessive taxation, and for having governments, and so you don't need this. That he understood, but it doesn't mean that he has any command of Austrian economics. And for me, so this was just another example. Well, apparently, the guy really doesn't know what he's talking about. But then comes my friend Philip Bargus, and he also publishes one or two articles which he explained that yes, hyperinflation would have resulted because in this situation the demand for money would have plummeted. Okay, now this was, I said, okay, so maybe Millet is not as extravagant as I thought. Maybe he got his inspiration from discussions with Philip Bargus or so. But in any case, so we have a little problem here, right? If even Austrian economists don't understand this. So therefore, I wrote a response. I said, no, wait a minute. So this is not quite how it works. And so I criticized him for this. And then ensued a back and forth. I won't go through the different articles, so people watching us, maybe they can, if they're interested, they should take their time. These are very short pieces, 2, 3, 4 pages, so a total of 16 or whatever. And and at the end, I think I made it clear that really what was at stake, the motivation was not the fear of hyperinflation, it was just, it was a purely political motivation. So Gervais Millet is maybe not quite the Austro-libertarian hero, kind of second incarnation of Christ or so on earth, but libertarian-minded politician to whom we should wish good luck and our best wishes and so on. But I mean, you cannot claim Austrian economics or libertarianism for his policies. It's just way over the top, right? And so that's my 2 cents on this. So I like the guy in principle. I mean, except for his disastrous pro-Zionist, pro-American empire foreign policy. This is just horrible. But this economic policies, it's the usual mixed bag. You're a politician, you have to do compromises and so on. Okay, he praises Austrian economics, that's fine, I'm happy about that. But I'm also a bit skeptical because if he praises Austrian economics and he screws up big time, not only in foreign policy, but also in various other fields, well, eventually it kicks back. Right? Because people will think, oh, so this is how an Austrian policy looks like. Well, I don't think there is such a thing. Austrian policy. Libertarianism would mean, okay, it's like what Mises answered when he was asked, oh, if you were the dictator, what would you decide? And then he said, well, I would abdicate. Okay, so that's really the libertarian position. You don't start this nonsense and you continue the nonsense. If you have the power to decide something, well, you just stop it. You no longer go on. Because right, the real choice is not between you making this choice or that choice. It's between either you making the choices for everybody, imposing your choice on everybody else, or letting everybody figure it out together, cooperate voluntarily to find the right solutions to get out of the mess that governments have created. That's the right solution.
Yeah, I agree. I want to ask you then regarding central banks in America and, you know, the monetary policy we have and this connection to economic warfare and even foreign policy and warfare in general. Um, they go hand in hand. What do you think is to come from the United States and their monetary policy and even potentially foreign policy?
The monetary expansionary monetary policy allows governments to pursue policies that are not popular because they don't even need tax money, right? So there are three big ways for governments to fund itself. I mean, four, right? Government enterprise, taxes, debt, and money creation out of nothing. Okay. Now, government enterprise, forget about this, right? This never works. That is, it can only work in quite lousily under two conditions, namely if they produce something that is essential, let's say like electricity. Here in France, we have a public electricity company. There's virtually no competitor allowed. So you have to use their services. Okay, these guys, they make profit, right? Because of the monopoly and an essential good. Otherwise, it's always the same disaster. It's always financial mayhem that results. Second is debt. Okay, fine, but debt, at least you need to cooperate with some people. You need to pay them interest so that they hand over their savings to you. Okay, that works for a while, but the problem is governments are so greedy and so voracious. They take such huge sums that interest rates shoot up very fast. So if funding out of credit is not accompanied by an expansion of the money stock, this will very quickly lead to very high interest rates and therefore explode the budgets, right? So right now, the US is paying around $1 trillion every year just to serve the debt. I mean, I'm talking about the federal government, right? Just $1 trillion just to serve the debt. And this is at very, I imagine this was 6% or 9%. In the early 1980s, we had 15%. Now do the math, what this means. Well, then at some point, all of the tax revenue just serves the debt. Forget about the military, forget about roads, forget about any sort of infrastructure, education, and so on. Nothing will be left except for serving the debt. Maybe this is not the worst of all things, right? At least it would paralyze these guys. Maybe it's not so bad. So I'm not really afraid of that. But I mean, that's the consequence. And therefore, they always make sure that they control the printing press, because this way they can create money out of nothing and thereby fund their own expenditure. And that is no longer dependent neither on the consent of the taxpayer, which is half-baked anyway. The taxpayer consents in the sense that he doesn't want to get into trouble, doesn't want to be locked up or shot at. Okay, if that's consent, okay, well, fine. Okay, I know a few muggers who would also be happy about that kind of consent. In the case of credit, you need the consent of your creditors. But with money creation out of nothing, you don't need the consent of anybody. You just do it. Of course, you cannot do it without limitation. There's a limitation, which is hyperinflation. If you overdo it, then people will just reject your money. But this is a very large margin. So governments love this thing. And so therefore, they can engage in all kinds of things that don't really have any backing in the population. And this is so to the extent that inflationary finance becomes more important, what you observe in practice is an estrangement between the government and the general population, and also accompanied with stronger divisions within the population, because everybody's used to having their way. Yes, we don't need the consent of any other, we just care about ourselves. So people at the end are no longer able to talk to each other, which is pretty much the situation in which you're slipping in the US, right? People are just shouting at each other, no longer have a conversation about in which you disagree, right? But it is an indirect consequence of such an inflationary financial system.
Yeah, I've heard people say that, well, we've never had a world reserve currency end up in hyperinflation. But I think that's just not an argument against it. It's just empirically hasn't been the case. But the logic remains that if you have a paper money fiat currency, it is very susceptible still to hyperinflation. Do you think
Correct.
this is the potential path if legal changes are not made for the dollar?
I mean, the people who are running American monetary and financial policies are very well trained. They know financial history. They know monetary history. I mean, they would have to be in a very desperate situation in order to let this come to a hyperinflation. Right now, I don't see it. I think there are various ways out, which are more or less painful, but don't involve a hyperinflation. When the US was last time in double-digit runaway galloping inflation in the 1970s, they brought in William Forsythe, the head of the central bank, and he just slammed on the brakes, and there was a terrible crisis, and they gained control again of the monetary system. I would expect them to do the same thing today. Of course, it would be more painful for the rest of the world because the US is more interconnected with the rest of the world. But honestly, I mean, they don't have any interest in losing this very powerful tool. It's great, not only financial and economic, but also military power that goes in hand with owning the reserve currency of the world. Right? I mean, they have diminished its standing, right, through the nonsense of the past 5 years when they were confiscating Russian or blocking, right, freezing Russian accounts and stuff like this. Okay, then why? Then you don't need US dollars. Then you look for alternatives. So this was a very stupid move. It's just ideologically driven, or maybe by complete blindness to the military reality and the options that the Russians and Chinese have. But they did it nevertheless, right? So if you do such errors repeatedly on a large scale, then of course you lose your reserve status, right? Then, but I don't think that they would not try to preserve it and do whatever is necessary to preserve that status.
Well,
I don't see it. I don't see it.
Yeah. I guess that's the other side, the pressure of the foreign policy, the American empire and imperialism, and trying to maintain the world hegemony, that if you want to maintain the empire, then you have to fund it. And that could be the pressure, perhaps, that drives America into more debt and puts the most pressure on the monetary system.
Yeah, but it was also, I mean, right, at some point you have to choose, right, between more inflationary finance or a more stable monetary system. And I think at that point, the choice is clear. They will opt for the most stable monetary system.
I guess I would agree that the economists who are trained in this would like that, but the politicians, the Trumanites, the Pentagon, CIA,
yeah, it's not impossible. Yes, it's true. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
If incompetence run the government, right, and you have always lots of incompetent people in government, and okay, there's no guarantee that they would make the right moves. I only can say that there are very smart people working there, not in the political leadership positions, but in the second row, civil servants and so on. They know the options. And but then too, right? I mean, you get a crazy president. He just appoints ideological freaks just because they toe his line. Then if you get a bunch of critical mass of incompetence in position of influence, yes, things get out of hand.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you to change the topic a little bit about your biography on Ludwig von Mises. I have yet to read it, but how did you get all this information?
Well, there were two main sources of information that I used systematically, and I was the first to do this systematically. Two archives. One was the archive of Mises' belongings that were kept in his Vienna apartment until 1938. In March 1938, the German Wehrmacht marches into Austria and annexes Austria to Germany. And at the same time, in their bags follow all the Secret Service types, right? So the SS and so on, and they start looking up regime opponents, of which Mises was one, right? So they visit his apartment, confiscate everything, take away everything that could be compromising. But also his books, right? Of course, all documents, papers, and so on, because by analyzing those, they say, okay, what's Mises' network? Is there any compromising stuff that we could use to blackmail him? And so on and so on. And so that was 1938. And then I think it was brought to Berlin, probably. And at the end of the war, they feared that this material would be destroyed, so they took it out of their own archives and put it on a train and were running around the train. And that train was found by the Red Army in 1945 in Bohemia, so which is today the Czech Republic. And so there were Mises documents and hundreds of other the documents of hundreds of other regime opponents. So everything was brought to Moscow. And they were interested in this for the same reason as the Nazis were interested in. And that was kept in a secret archive. Nobody knew about this. And the existence of that archive came to light after the collapse of the Soviet Union. That is, more precisely, the perestroika phase, right? So the late 1980s. And then two Austrian historians went to Moscow. So not Austrian economists, but really historians from Austria. And they created an index of everything that was in that archive. And then some Austrian economists from the US got wind of this, in particular, a colleague, Richard Ebeling. He's a great Mises fan. And he had been working on a Mises biography. At that time already, he had a Russian wife. So they go together to Moscow, visit the archive, and then start talking about. So everybody takes notice. So it was a few years later, 95, approximately 94, 95, that I got in touch with the Mises Institute, and then Lou Rockwell asked me to write a Mises biography. So it was a competition project as compared to Richard Ebeling and so on. And I accepted because I had no other academic employment at the time. I was very happy for this trust and also for the great mission, which allowed me to learn more about Mises. So I accepted. And then one of my first trips was to Moscow. And the second archive is in Grove City College. So this is where one of Mises's most important students was a professor for many years. The student was Hans Sennholz. So he was also of German descent, but did a PhD with Mises in the early 1950s. And then became, on Mises' recommendation, a professor at Grove City College, which is in western Pennsylvania. It's between Pittsburgh and Erie. And after Mises' death, Sennholz bought Mises' papers from his wife. She needed money. She didn't know where to keep the papers and what to keep the papers for. So she sold all of this to the college, and there it was kept. And then over the years, yes, one or other person would look at it, but there was no systematic interest, right? Nobody really went through this, and much of the correspondence is in German. There's also some correspondence in English, some of it is in French, and so on. And nobody was working on a Mises biography, so it was not particularly interesting. So I was the first one really to walk through every single page. So you have whatever, 15,000 pages in Grove City, and you have 10,000 papers or so in Moscow. That's my source of information. And it brought everything together in a concentrated way, of course. It gives a smashing impression because there was lots of stuff that I could tell that nobody had told before.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So is Mises's library at Grove City still?
No, it is at Hillsdale College.
Hillsdale, I see.
I don't know whether Richard Ebeling was involved with this. I suppose it was his predecessor. In Hillsdale, they also had a very strong free market orientation. And I think it was arranged by Hans Sennholz that they bought the books from the Mises widow. I think for Growth City to purchase both the correspondence and the books would have exploded the budget, so they separated it.
Okay.
So if you ever come to Southern Michigan, go to Hillsdale College, there's a special room for the Mises books. It's a large room full of books. Yeah.
Okay. My best friend, he's in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I want to go see him this month or next month. So I'll make the trip.
Nice project. Yeah.
So I want to ask you a couple more questions. As I'm seeing the younger generations, Gen Z, be under the pressure of, inflation, democracy, just not being a viable solution, they're becoming more radical, more extreme, and I think both in a rightward and leftward direction. And I want to ask you how you've dealt with socialists and communists, perhaps students or colleagues, perhaps. How you deal with them and what you see the way forward is.
Well, first of all, I would say it's important not to let politics destroy your life. Okay, so politics is very important. There's no doubt about this. But politics is not everything. Okay, if you look for your friends only in terms of what they think in terms of politics, well, as a libertarian, you get pretty soon very lonesome. Okay, so you need to look at other things, right? Does the person have a good heart? Sometimes you have people who are just profoundly disoriented. They're good willing, they're good persons deep down, but they are just whatever, communist or whatever, or a nationalist, an imperialist, and so on. Yeah, you've got just to live with this. And then, of course, I wouldn't recommend that you marry a convicted communist unless the person really loves you, because then it becomes possible. Right? So I would say this would be my first advice. Don't look only at politics. It's just, but look at persons who can keep politics at bay and look at other things, all the good things in life that there are also, which are important. Then, of course, as a libertarian, you should not compromise on principle. What you genuinely believe, there's no reason to hide it. And it's important to organize with others, see something. The basic tension for libertarian is always that you don't believe that government policy is a solution for really anything, right? So governments only screw up; they make things worse. So this creates a contradiction, right? Why should you become involved in politics at all? So I think the proper way to handle this for libertarians is to be involved in discussions and on the level of companies, and so in a private framework. There you can be creative, but I don't think there's any reason to hope that we could improve things through politics. So our drive should always be to reduce politics, right? So encourage people who want to go into politics in order to reduce them. I mean, this is exceedingly rare. And you see it in the case of somebody like Millet, who so exposed himself and said, yeah, chainsaw and we're cutting everything. Okay, I mean, what he cut in the overall scheme of things is rather modest, okay? All this rhetoric, all this brouhaha, and I mean, look at how much he actually cut, right? It's not nothing, but it's we're not here at the onset of a libertarian revolution, right? These things take time. It's just that's just how it is. Right? But still, right? It's important that such things take place. It's what I love most about it, as in the case of the Trump administration, is that they fire all the bureaucrats. I love this. They just fire them. Yes, that's very good, right? Because then it creates a disincentive to go into politics and build your life on politics. That's not how it should be. Should be risky. Why should they have greater security than the rest of the population whom they terrorize every day? Yes, they should fear for their careers. I like that.
Yeah. I when it comes to politics and politicians, I do consider like who's really the public servant here? Who's paying who? Why do they want to be public servants so bad?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's that
It's an
Orwellian.
old joke, right, about the civil servants. It's the guys who expect to be served.
Right. Nice. Yes. That's great advice. Yeah, I think that's great. So, lastly, I want to ask you, I'm working on my dissertation. I believe I have a year left. My research dissertation is the economics of suicide. And you've been, if not the most significant and influential for my own research and developing my own dissertation as this cultural effect of monetary manipulation and inflation. So I would just like to ask you for some advice, general advice regarding this topic or the dissertation process in general.
Yeah, of course, the Austrians always look at causes, right? We're not happy just looking at correlations between numbers, right? So we're looking at what drives the decision to kill yourself, which is, of course, very strongly related to the question, what drives you not to kill yourself?
Yes.
Right? So it's always important to keep this in mind. So under which circumstances would people rather not live than continue to live? Right? What are the motivations? What are the convictions that might be present? And of course, in virtually all such cases, it's a lack of love, right? They feel not loved, superfluous, or a sense of despair. It's all meaningless. There's nothing worth living for. So what creates such a situation? Where does this come from? Of course, I think it's connected with inflationary monetary policies because and something like a welfare state, because welfare state creates something like a rubber chamber. Is this the expression that you use in the mental asylum, where you put people in the rubber chamber? Whatever they do, they cannot really hurt themselves. This drives you crazy, right? Because it means there's no causal relation between what you think and what you do and what happens anywhere. It all makes no sense. Yes, I mean, that's if you live in a rubber chamber world, yes, I mean, I understand why people would wish to kill themselves. And fiat money in the welfare state, they contribute to creating a society that resembles the rubber chamber. Yeah, so this what I would recommend, right? So look at the causes, look at the definitions. Did you read Durkheim?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, so it's still the classic text. A few others have been written. It's always important to start with the classic authors first and then move forward. I don't think within Austrian economics or Austrian sociology, nobody has dealt with suicide so far. So you will be the first one.
Excellent. Yeah. I a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to your former student, Jeffrey Degner, and
Yes.
he mentioned something that was quite profound where he said, and I think he credited it to you, which is that the original sin is interventionism, because once you can intervene in people's property and their property rights, then it opens the door to all other forms of intervention. And yeah, that's been sticking with me.
Yes, it's correct. And again, right, the important word distinction here is between interventionism and a mixed economy or government action, right? I mean, in human societies, we always benefit from governments. And we have governments in commercial companies, in clubs, associations, always have some government because they're providing services for our members. But these things are, of course, competitive. People are not obliged to be a member of a firm or of a club and so on. So you can exit, right? Which is not the case in politics. But even in, right, as far as the services are concerned that are expected from government, public order, security, and so on. Yes, I mean, from a theoretical point of view, it's pretty obvious that these things could be and have been provided in the past by privately run organizations. So in that case, right, so there's government without interventionism. Government sticks within its own borders, and the government is part of the private property order. It's not, it doesn't go beyond. Interventionism starts there where they exceed the boundaries, the legitimate boundaries of their own actions and invade the property of others. That's always where the trouble starts. And if this is admitted in principle that this is legitimate, then of course there's always a Damocles sword above your heads, and so this uncertainty is increased, and all kinds of consequences follow from it. And for the beneficiaries, it's of course a huge moral hazard, because if this is no longer a matter of principle, but just of degree, well, why can't we push a little further each time?
Yeah. Yes. Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for your time. And I want to mention, with the Menger Institute, we're a new institute teaching Austrian economics, and we're developing our 4th cohort in the fall. But this summer, we're going to be doing a course on anarchy. And we're very excited about this. So, yeah, we would love to have you lecture sometime. We do it live, but we can figure out something with the time and stuff. If you'd like, it'd be a pleasure to have you lecture for us.
We'll work something out.
Okay, excellent. Professor Guido Hülsmann, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yes.